Hello, Happy New Year, and welcome back to the Alpha Demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software. I'm pleased to be joined today by Dion McCormick, no relation, who you've heard in the past, and he is going to be starting a brand new series where she's going to be building out a web application. This one is going to be a task manager, web and mobile application. I'm sorry, I should correct myself there. This is also, of course, a Q&A webcast, so if you do have questions, you can type those questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. So some news for the new year. Our friend and colleague, Sarah Mitchell, after 7 years with Alpha, has decided to pursue other interests, actually hobbies and stuff that she'll be working on. And so we wish her a great deal of luck. But before she left us with a great deal of video content that will more than make up for the well, not make up, will be added to the Alpha DevCon 2022 series. So for those of you who are saying, hey, I remember there were a couple more sessions that you owed us, that is the case, and you will have them, I believe, as soon as next week. They are just finishing up the editing process. I think you'll be very pleased with them. They'll take you on a very deep dive into building out Alpha Anywhere applications. So it's sort of a nice parting gift there. So let's get started. Dion, are you there?
I am ready to go.
Fantastic. So let me go ahead and make you the presenter. Well, it's been a while since I've done a webinar. I'm getting rusty here.
You're a little rusty.
Okay, I made you the presenter. I'll let you know when I can see you. And we are good to go.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. We look forward to speaking with you today. Obviously, our primary goal is to help the community to, answer questions. So if you do have burning questions, either on the topic or the things I'm doing here, or other ones that you may want to try and cover, feel free to go to your GoToWebinar Q&A panel, put those in. Dave will be monitoring those, and we'll try to get to as many of those as possible. So I want to say thank you again for spending the time with us. We're excited about spending it. And what I decided to do was kind of like a little bit of a start from scratch. Often we jump into stuff like right in the middle of things, and we haven't done this in a while. So I said, hey, what'd be fun would be just kind of like step by step build some, small little app showing different features and capabilities of the tools, how you'd approach things, some little tricks to make your life easier, and just so how quick and easy you can to generate things by just using the Alpha tool set, nothing else associated with that. So we're going to do a little quick task manager example. We're going to create a task manager database. We're going to go ahead and then create a UX. And then we're going to focus really on taking that UX and modifying it and optimizing it for making a really nice looking mobile application. So we'll go through the different pieces so you can do that. And then the last part of it is, well, how do you deploy something along these lines out into the field, et cetera, and some different techniques and ways you can do that from there. So again, this is going to be a very simple application. It's really going to be mainly focused on the mechanics of what are the different elements of the Alpha environment, what can you use to help develop it, and most importantly, how you're using what's the primary key is the list control to help you develop a offline app in terms of your ability to manage that in an offline manner. Again, we're going to start simple, but then layer on top of it. And obviously, if you have any information, suggestions, questions, please let us know so we can enhance this presentation as we go through it. So with that in mind, again, we're going to start from scratch. Everything is going to be done inside of the Alpha tool set, and we're going to enhance that over the next few sessions. So we really appreciate you joining us, and hopefully you'll find this interesting and helpful. And so we're just going to dive right in. So with that, I'm going to jump over into my development environment. Now I'm starting with a brand new project or workspace, excuse me. So nothing is in this workspace. I'm really starting from a blank page. And I kind of want to start from there and work our way up to where we have, at least initially today, a core data source and then a very simple user interface, not mobile optimized yet. We're going to cover that in the next, but really just focused on something that just works out of the box. And you can see the different capabilities, and also most importantly, focusing on some built-in features that make your life easy in terms of how fast you can develop something within the tool from this standpoint here. And what I plan on doing is sending, I'll send into the team, if you're interested in getting the files and stuff like that, we'll put together a zip file of all the information so you'll be able to download it and play with it on your environment from that standpoint there. So again, starting from a blank slate, the first thing we really need is some kind of data source. And I kind of debated how to handle this, maybe putting one up on there, but I thought, let's just keep it all self-contained. So Alpha, and we covered this just a few weeks ago, has a very, very powerful, cool set of SQL tools that are built into the system. Things like query editors, command windows, explorers, etc. And there's actually a nice, cool little feature where you can actually create a whole SQLite database right within the system. And what I'm going to do is use that to create a little simple database that we're going to use for this project. Thus, it can be completely self-contained. You don't have to worry about a database server. Obviously, this could be connected to any kind of database environment you so choose. But it's very straightforward. Now, the other reason I want to show you this is it's kind of nice to create a SQLite database, especially if you're doing debugging, need to share from someone. Let's say you had a big database, but you were doing something you had just to get out of some sample data. You could actually create a little SQLite database and use that for your bug reporting with the team in case you run across something. And that really helps the team because they don't have to try and set up a connection string to some kind of on-premise or private environment, etc. It can all be self-contained when you send it into our team. So there's a little hidden agenda there just to kind of show you how this works. So I'm going to go into my development environment, clicking SQL here, and down here you'll see Create SQLite Database. So it brings up this interface. And I can go ahead and give it a database name. So I'm going to call it Task Manager, and it's going to be webinar.db. After create, I can do different things. I can upload it right to Amazon S3 or it'll open the folder there. But you can see right now we don't have anything in the database per se. It's just this is where we're going to save the data. So what I want to do is add a table, and we're going to just call this tasks. We're going to keep this very, very simple. So you'll see it's a type of table named tasks, and the type is undefined. And you could create more tables here. But we have to, before we can actually save this database, we have to define the type or really the definition of it. So we're going to go down here. You'll notice there's a edit table definition. If you make a mistake, you can delete it and restart it. And also if it's you've already set one up, you can preview it from here. So I'm going to edit the table definition, and you're going to see there are 3 methods you can use to create a table. And this is kind of powerful. And again, this goes to more of a powerful feature of this is you can actually define a SQL query using our familiar SQL query. So you could say, oh, go attach to a table in my current database and just pump it into the SQLite database. And then that you could include with your bug report, etc. Very straightforward. It works just like grids and lists and stuff where you set up what connection string, what table, any filters, etc., and then it generates from there. Another method which is kind of powerful is a xbasic. You can actually define a function and have it make a call and then come in and define the data from a function. So maybe calling an API or something like that. But for our purposes, we're going to use static data because we want this to be standalone and an example of there. So you'll see right here that in order to do that, you kind of have to define the information. It gives you a little help up here where it tells you how to specify that data. And what's important is when you do this, you have to actually tell it what are the different fields and their types when you go through this process. You can see right here it has, this is like the first row that defines the columns, and then a second row is actually one of the example records in it. So I'm going to go ahead and go into here where it says static data. Again, gives you that information right here. It's a comma separated value. You could always use any other external editor, Notepad++, Sublime, whatever you want to. But what's kind of nice here is I can actually do a couple of things. I can insert a sample, and you'll notice that it just sends it right in there, which is really helpful because then everything's kind of set up and you can start editing it. The other method you could do is say insert field type, and let's say we want a integer, and it just helps you make sure that you use the proper name for the field definition type so that when it actually generates the SQL database, it knows how to emit the commands to SQLite to do that from there. But let me go back. I want to go ahead and insert a sample here. Okay. So we're going to keep an integer. It's a primary key integer, excuse me. I'm now going to create a field called name. And so this will be just the name of the task. And then I'm going to create another one called details, which again is just a text field from there. And then the last thing I'm going to do is actually change this and put this to priority. So we'll have a name and details and then a priority for a task in the system there. Now you'll notice it's currently of type numeric. I can look here and say, you know what? I really don't need a numeric. A numeric is like 1 point, could be a float, etc. So I really just want this to be an integer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this, highlight that, and say insert field type integer. And you'll notice all it did there was overrode with the proper name. So when it creates this field in the database, i.e. the SQLite database, you will then see that it's an integer field, not a float or a numeric field from there. Now I've kind of recreated or regenerated my definition of this. So now I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to go task 1. And you notice you can either put it in quotes, you don't have to. So I'm just going to make it consistent here and just go details for task 1. Notice that if you have commas in there, you can use the quotes to do that. And I'll just say this is priority 1. And then we'll have priority 2 is second one is task 2. And again, you can use any kind of external, editor to do this. Task 2 and last but not least, we'll make this priority 2. So now I've kind of defined my database definition here and some sample records. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that just in case I have to recreate it. So I'll click OK. So I've created my sample data. It's telling me I'm going to create the table, name is task, it's type static. You can create indexes. So if you have a bunch of stuff, you can index your columns for faster speed, etc., much like any SQL. And then there's a few other things like here. You can specify a name of a timestamp field, and you can strip curly brackets for GUI ID. Those are much more detailed, like if you're using more complex scenarios. We're going to keep it very simple. So I'm going to click OK. And now you'll notice I have a new table in here called static data, which has all that information I specified for it. I can add more tables if I want to. I can modify it, etc. And I can even click this to say preview the data. And you'll see, oh, it's previewing this because I wrote it. If it actually makes a SQL query back to a database or something, you would see that. So it's your way to kind of test it and make sure that it's working sufficiently from there. Now, as you can see, I've already done a little work here. So let's say I'm doing this a couple times. I don't want to have to go in and reset everything up every time. So built into this tool, the Create SQLite Database tool, is a nice little feature. I can actually save these settings here. So I'll call it Task Database. Okay. And then I can click and say, oh, you know what? I got called away. I got to go to lunch or something like that. So now I can come back in here, go to Tool. Where's SQL? It's under, where's my SQL tool? Blanking. Oh, there we are. I can go to SQL, go into Create SQLite Database. Oh, it's blank, row, but I can just click here and click the Load Settings, and it'll bring it in, and I'm back in business. It's got the static data information, it's got the name of the database, everything else that's associated with it. So that's kind of handy, and I recommend it because often you'll kind of go through and you go, oh, I kind of got to restart it. This just saves you time. You don't have to go through, especially as your database has 3 or 4 tables and a bunch of different stuff. This just saves you a lot of time. So once you've got everything ready to go and you're satisfied, you can click Create SQL Database. Okay? And it's created. Notice that it's confirmed that's created. There were no errors. Everything's looking good. Now, since I said after create action is open the database, I'm going to click OK. And there is my database. And it's a full compliant SQLite database file. So if you are even using a different tool that uses SQLite, like you're doing a Python script or something else like that, it will work fine. SQLite will be able to open it, handle it, etc. from right there. Now, this is kind of buried. If you notice, it kind of put it into a temp location because it's really not meant to be permanent. So I'm just going to copy this real quick, and I'm going to go to my desktop, and I'm going to paste it there, just so I know it's in a good area. Now, I'd probably paste that into the project if I was going to hand it off to someone or do something like that. But I don't remember where this is, and temp directories can get overwritten and things like that. So I like to kind of take it once I'm done, put it into a known location that I can then manage it appropriately. So that's step one. We now have a sample database, a very simplistic one that we can use for our project. So we don't have to spin up SQL Server or MySQL or anything else to put those together, and we're ready to rock and roll. So now that I've done that and I'm good to go, my next step is to actually tell my project here, hey, where is my data source? Because this will be a data-driven project kind of scenarios. So I'm in the Web Projects Control Panel. I'm going to go ahead and go up to Tools and go to our handy dandy Alpha DAO connection string. Now, you've seen this many, many times, and often you go, okay, click Northwind. And I actually debated just clicking there and then using another tool to add another table, but I kind of wanted to start from scratch and something clean. So that's kind of why I showed you the other process. Plus, again, it's really handy to have the ability to create these little SQLite databases to hand to people or do other things along those lines. Actually, another little feature of SQLite databases is with our mobile solution, you can actually include those in your project. So you can actually create like a whole catalog of information and deploy it using SQLite. And within our apps, we can pull that information in both through JavaScript, but also through lists and other static data, et cetera. It's a lot of really handy ways. SQLite's kind of a really nice thing. Now, do realize, and I apologize, I don't mean to go into the weeds, SQLite is not a true SQL database. It is a SQL compatible database, but it misses a lot of the, like for instance, they don't really have a date type. And so it's not really the end all be all for everything. It's got a lot of features. It's really for simplistic data stores. But for these kind of projects, it's pretty straightforward from that standpoint there. Okay, so I've done that. So now I want to create a new connection string. Our standard connection for the first one is just CONN. You'll see that in a lot of our samples and it's and examples and demos and stuff like that. It just makes it easy for when you do things. I'm going to go ahead here and click build. And so now this gives me all my different ones that I can do. In fact, there's some new ones I'm seeing like Foundation DB. I don't even know what that is. Very cool. So you see there's a lot of really cool one. There's Alpha Cloud, a SQL database, you can even do static JSON kind of thing as a data source, a little different angle, and some other fun ones like MongoDB, etc. But I'm going to go down here and I'm going to pick SQLite. Where's SQLite? Right there. Because I know I'm going to be consuming that database. Okay. So this brings up my SQLite builder. There's a bunch of different options you can do here. But there's even ways to do stuff in memory, etc. if it's only going to be like temporary. But for our purposes, we're using a permanent file, that file I created before. So I'm going to go ahead and click this little folder icon. I'm going to navigate to the desktop and I'm going to find my database. You can see this is the other one I was testing with the other day or a long time ago. And I click OK. And that's important is when you create the database, make sure to put .db because what will happen is you'll come here and it won't show up. Even if you save it as Task Manager or Webinar without the DB, it will work, but you won't see it in these kind of things. So the convention is for SQLite databases, it's .db. So I select that. Okay, so now it points it to that. I can then do a whole bunch of other things that are normal, like for instance, read only, etc. I can now test it. This just merely lets the workspace know that I can go and open it and read the data and go from there. So now I've got my new connection string and I can click OK. I can actually click and explore right here, but I'm just going to click OK. And now we have our connection string ready to go. So we can continue working and starting to do the rest of our project, which we'll do in a few moments. But now that that's connected, I have access to a lot of tools. So remember, we have a whole bunch of different SQL tools that are available, the Database Explorer, Command, Query, etc. So let's just go into the Explorer. Now I go in the Explorer, you'll see there's local tables. This is like DBF tables, but I can click this little plus here. I can select my existing connection string. I can actually create a new one if I want to and click OK. And now if I look at the tables, there's my task. So you'll notice it's bringing in the different table data that I put together, name, details. And I can actually click here and say, let's see, show data in table. So it's showing those sample records that I created when I created the database. And it's always good to create a couple sample ones just so you get out of the date. You can start rocking and rolling. You can drop that table. I don't recommend it here. You can also do some other stuff. You can count the rows and stuff like that. But just wanted to show you that now that I've created that SQLite database, it is for all intents and purposes, a connection string. I can use all my different SQL database tools. In fact, let me try this. I didn't try this before, but let me try this. Let's go in here to the SQL Query Genie. Okay, so you notice I have my connections up here. I can add a table, and I'll look there. So that works here. And I notice select from tasks. I can then execute this and do it here. And then you can do all the kind of stuff you would do with databases where ID is equal to 1 and run that query, etc. And it treats it like any other data source, and you're able to do it. And this is kind of handy, by the way. And one of the things I wanted to kind of show is that all of these built-in tools are right in here. You don't have to go use external tools to do very straightforward projects and other pieces, even things that are more complex. Now, reality is I use things like Navicat when I'm doing database work for a much more intensive database environment, but I don't need to have those tools. I can do it all within here. And it's kind of handy if I gotta, create a little query, I can just go in and do it right here. And then I have the query language that I can use to then use in my project at other times from there. So I'm not gonna do anything more on there. I just wanted to show once I have this query set up, once I have the connection string, I'm good to go. So with that, we're ready to actually go ahead and start creating our first user interface to actually interact with that. And one of the cool things I want to show you is it makes life super duper simple because Alpha will generate you basically a shell app fully functional without it. But before I do that, I wanted to do a real quick check with Dave and see if there's any questions or if audio's okay, stuff like that.
Everything is going great, and there is no questions on what you're covering just at the moment, but we'll have a few general ones.
No problem. This kind of good. Cool. Thank you very much. Okay. So our primary tool is going to be the UX. Now, there's many different ways you could, I could create UXs, data bind them, etc. But because I'm focusing on a potentially offline mobile application, I need to start with the UX because the UX is that primary animal, because within that UX will be then our list control, which actually controls not only the connection to the data, but the offside and a whole bunch of other things there. So let's make sure. Okay, connected. Well, duh, I'm already. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to go here and go to New. I'm going to click Web. Make sure I haven't lost you, Dave. I'm sorry. I think my connection just did a little reconnect.
Yeah, you know what? Your audio is coming through fine, but I'm not seeing your mouse cursor move on the screen. If you want to try that again. Oh, and we're back.
All right. Yeah, okay. I'm sorry. I think it had to reset the connection. So, okay. So let me go back here. We're going to create a new component. We're going to start with a web component. Now we have a whole bunch of different ones, but the one we're going to grab is the UX component here. Click next. Now, this is really cool. There's a lot. I'm not going to use it for today's demonstration, but there are some really cool things where you can use and have it pre-set up a full mobile app ready to go. And we'll come back and explore a few of these down the road in our next sessions, just because I wanted to kind of show you some of the cool stuff in there. Again, the more I find I have like a shell app with a bunch of capabilities in it, then I can dissect it and understand how it worked. So I don't have to try and scratch my head and create things from scratch. But I'm going to start simple in this case because I want to really keep it easy. So I'm going to click OK. It now creates a UX here. This is a blank UX. So all I need to do first is I'm going to go ahead and add a control. And the only thing I'm going to add right here is a list control. So there's a couple different ways I can find it. I can actually go down into the data controls. It is a list control because it connects to data. Or I can just click here and say add control, brings up here, and I can type list controls and it brings up the list control there. And then if I use that control a lot, I can actually add controls to my favorites. So for instance, let's just do that real quick. I'm going to go text box. I'm going to just add a text box on it. And then I can add that to the favorites in there. So I can add that. I think I do it. Oh, I'm sorry. Right click here and say, you know what? I use text box a lot. The other thing I use is list controls a lot. Another thing I tend to do, and I kind of set this up is, well, let me, let's see. Let's go to, I use containers a lot. And I also use static text. Is that in there? Is that label? Yeah, I like that one. And static. So what's nice is with my favorites, if I use them a lot, I can go right here and click them, and then I can just drop, I don't have to go dig them out. I don't even have to say out of control. I can say, oh, I need this. So I need a list. So I'm going to click on here. It's going to open up here. There. So I'm going to go list tasks. Now, sometimes you'll see this where you can create multiple at one time. I'm clicking create a single new control for this. So I'll say list of tasks. Again, what's cool about this is that, I can set a whole bunch of information about it. It's, the label position. But for right now, all I want to do is put in the name of the task. Now you'll see at the bottom, there's a neat little button. It's a Genie button because it's got this little Genie lamp in front of it called List Control Quick Setup Genie. Highly recommend you use that. I mean, today, when I create up a new list, I don't do it manually. I use the Quick Setup Genie because it allows me to get things done faster. And then I go in and remove things or add things as I need them. So I put in the name of my control, and then I'm going to click here and go List Control Quick Setup Genie. So this will walk me through how to do it. Now I can create different types of lists, different data binding, etc. But it kind of assumes you're going to connect to some kind of standard connection, like the data source we've created. So I'm going to click here, connection string. I'm going to say connection. Okay. Then I want to do fields from the table. In this case, we have one table that is fields. Notice if I had to build views and other things, I could click them up here. They would show here. But we just need tasks. For field lists, I'm going to go ahead and select all of them because I want all of them in my list. Now, remember, this doesn't mean you have to show all of this. This is more just showing that, hey, here's all the fields I want to have available because some may be hidden and used behind the field or behind the scenes. So for instance, ID, I might not actually, I'll use it, but I won't actually display that. So I can go there from there. And then I could set up filters if I wanted to, ordering, etc. within it. So I basically now told the system, hey, where do I go to get my data? Now what I want to do is enable a detail view because I want to be able to edit these fields. So this is where it's enabling the ability for the list control to edit fields because it has that ability built into it. And there's a whole bunch of different things you can do. It's going to give me a standard set of default view buttons, but you can modify and tweak it as you see. But usually I just accept it because then it's very easy to change other pieces. Now I would like to add a search part, because I want to be able to search my tasks. So I'm going to go down here. Oh, there we go. It's just being a little slow. And I'm going to add a search part. Now there's two ways of doing it. And I'll go into this. I can create individual controls. So I could say search the task details or search the task name. But in my case, what I'd like to do is use a single keyword control. This I use a lot because then for the user, they have one control on there they can do their searching with. They don't have to, get really specific. And there's tons of other ways you can search lists, but I find the single keyword control is very strong. And then the search field parts is basically saying, great, you want a single keyword, but which actual columns do I need? And I'll come back to that in a moment, name and details. So all I really want them to be able to do is search name and details, not worried about ID or priority from that standpoint there. And again, I'll come back and show you what that error message means in a moment. Now, the other thing I want to do, which is very powerful, is I want an ability to use this offline. So I'm going to persist this local data to local storage. That means that it will wire up everything I need to make sure that it will pull the data, allow me to edit it locally and send it back up from that standpoint here. So this is my quick list builder. I've told it where I'm getting the data from. I am telling it I want a detail view to be able to edit that data. I'm also telling it I want to be able to search that data, and I want to be able to persist that data to local storage, meaning I'll be able to handle offline operations. And I click OK. So it's going to take a moment here. Give me that error. I'm going to come back and talk. Part of this is that because it's a SQLite database, the system didn't know we're going to fix this. No big deal. So I'll click OK because I want it to go ahead and create all my controls. And you'll see it created a whole bunch of stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I'll go task webinar UX because I want to save my UX and my included items here. Okay, so it's just going to go ahead and save that first time, make a backup, other pieces from here, render it, and we're good to go. Now, I could run this right away, but you notice there was an error, and it said it doesn't know what is the primary key of that data source. And it needs that information to be able to do things like saving and updating, et cetera, in a standard format. So I'm going to go back into my list of tasks. That's what's been generated. As you can see, if I started, I'd have to set all this stuff. It handles all that forward, including creating detail views, search parts, and stuff like that. So if you'll notice, if I come down here, return value primary key is it's giving me that error, but the reason why is it couldn't figure out ID. And this is the thing about SQLite. SQL Server, MySQL, other tools, you're not going to have any problems at all. But you'll notice that it's saying, oh, I just didn't know what that is. So no big deal. You just go in here, you click this button right here, you tell it which is the column is the primary key, and click OK. And now it knows that, and it'll get rid of that error. So, notice this is even smart enough. So what's going on is I've told it that for the list, the primary key is ID, but it's also saying, hey, you have a detail view, and I'll show you this in a moment, but you haven't told the detail view which is the primary key. There's kind of two places you have to set that primary key data, but it's saying, please correct this. So I'm going to click OK. I'm going to go over here to detail view, and I'm going to go to the table properties. So again, I set the primary key for the list here, but for my detail view, I need to go to table properties, because this is where you tell it what kind of the nature of the table is. So I'm going to click in here, and you'll notice, oh, if in this task table, it's missing this primary key field. So I'm going to go ahead and click ID, much like I did there. And I'm going to say this is auto increment. And so we're good to go from there. Click OK. Now it says it, but it's going to go ahead and click OK. It's going to fix that from that standpoint there. So now I have my two items here. I've set up my list, everything, and I can go ahead and run it. Let's go ahead and look and see what it looks like right out of the gate. So let me go ahead and click Working Preview. Okay, it's working. Notice when I click up here, it's putting data down here. But this is kind of a kludgy environment. I mean, it's using a default. So to make this look a little nicer for our presentation, I'm just going to go in here to Properties and go to Style Name. And I want to go into here and use the compact. So out of the box, the style is set up for mobile, meaning bigger numbers, bigger buttons. But for today, and only for today, what I want to do is use a compact theme so it looks a little better on the screen. And this is used like when you're doing things in the desktop web, those pairs. So I'm going to go ahead and click here. Go ahead and save it. Always go save it, because then it keeps an archival copy, much like again. So go in here. And now it's a little bit easier to read. Again, it's still a little crazy there, but kind of there. And it's all updated and ready to go. So like, for instance, I'm on detail for task 1 or 2. When I click them, it updates the data down here. So let's go to task 2. I'm going to go ahead and put this information in there. Notice when I put the information, it highlighted the save button. Click save. Now notice something interesting. When I click save, it put this little orange caret over here. That means that because I enabled offline functionality, it has saved that change in local storage here, but it hasn't persisted to my backend database because it's a two-step process and they don't have to happen at the same time. I'm going to click here to synchronize it, and it's going to take that information locally. It's going to go compare it with the database and update the database. So now you'll notice that little thing is gone. My SQLite database has been updated. In fact, I can go right here to my Database Explorer and look at the show the data, and you'll notice, I'm looking directly at the database. It is updated record number 2 with task with that modification that I put in the system from there. So that's the cool thing, is that Alpha has all this built into it, so you don't have to worry about writing a whole bunch of code. It's going to handle it from there. And I'm going to spend some time showing you some other tricks as I go through it to make your life easier, so you don't have to have 2 buttons, that you can just have 1 button and have it try and save automatically. There's some other little nice features that just make things a little easier for your users for how they go, and we'll go show you that next there. But that's kind of where I wanted to end today, was basically we created a data source, in this case a SQLite data source. We were able to set it up. we're able to use the built-in tools to play with it before we even created anything. We went ahead and created a new UX, and we used the built-in Genie to have it do all the creation of the different pieces that I'm going to use down the road, including a detail view with buttons that need to be used there for saving, updating, etc. A list that shows our list. Obviously, this is not ready for prime time, and also a search functionality. Let's go ahead and do this. Let's say 1, 2, 3. So you can see, boom, all built in. I didn't have to do anything at all. Just, I said, give me a keyword, search on both name and details. I can clear the filter. It'll show me both of them, etc., all built into it. So what we're going to focus on our next section is like, well, yeah, this is nice, but really wouldn't be useful on a mobile phone or a mobile device. So we're going to talk about next time is how we can start recreating this to make it really look good on a mobile device. Use some of the built-in mobile tools, things like the headers and other pieces to make it look a little nicer, and navigation, etc. Just so you'll see how we can then take something that's kind of raw and turn it into more of a finished product in terms of doing things on a mobile, and talk a little bit more about that. That will be our next session. We'll focus on that. Then after that, we'll go into some other tricks and techniques and other neat things you can do. And we'll be also talking about deployment of how you can easily deploy this out into the real world for your users to be able to use it. So with that, I'm going to pause. Going to go ahead and turn it over to Dave, see if there's any questions you have. Again, on this, we'll start with those. But if you have other kind of questions you've been waiting to ask for, let us know, and we'll see what we can do. Without Sarah, the odds are lower, but we'll do our best. We try.
Oh, I don't know. Don't be so negative. We can. We'll get these done.
No, I'm going to be negative. I'm still in mourning. See, I always pulled my tail out of the fire many times before.
Well, this presentation was terrific, Dan. We don't have any questions on this particular presentation because I think you did such a good job explaining it. But
I know a lot of people have used these techniques, so
yeah. So, but we do have a couple just general questions, and the first one has to do with the new integrated login. The question is: previously, I had security settings that required a password change on first login for new user accounts. The question is, does this still work with the integrated login component?
I don't know. I'm going to have to look into that and find that out.
I believe the answer actually is yes. It turns out we didn't actually, although we've rewritten sort of the interface and how things get set up in the front, as you'll see, but underlying the system still works. That should still be an option. If you can't find it, let us know. And just as a reminder, if you do have questions, or if you're listening to this not live, but as a recording, you can always send them to guides, GUIDES, @alphasoftware.com. We do monitor that, and we will get you back answers to those questions.
Dynamite. The next one other thing real quick before we go, I think one of the other cool features about the new and improved basically security login builders, the 2FA capabilities, the two-factor authentication. So it's got a lot of features that's becoming, I just did some stuff, I don't know if you've seen it, but a number of companies over the holiday, January 1, are requiring 2FA for their systems, just because it's so effective at reducing, data breaches and things like that. So definitely, if you're looking into that integrated, check it out. The 2FA, two-factor authentication, is really nicely developed in there and integrated in it, and it works really nicely. And that will help you harden your applications for your clients or for your own applications, so that people can't, spoof, and it just gives you another level of easy.
And I'd also like to point out, we added all of this functionality based on requests that we got from this very series of webinars. And we had so many questions about 2FA and setting up things that we said, okay, we got to make this easier. There are too many questions, so it's still fairly intricate, and sophisticated. So you may run into issues. You can always email us at guides, but it was based on user feedback that we started adding all this stuff to it. So keep that user feedback coming. Next question: what's the trick of hosting multiple unrelated alpha launch apps on the same server? So I guess we would unpack that in two ways. One is, what's the trick to running multiple unrelated alpha apps, even if they're not alpha launch apps, on the same server?
Yeah, I have not done alpha launch, and in fact, we're going to cover that as part of this
Yep.
project because I want to talk about different deployments. But just
Oh,
let
fantastic.
everybody else, like, you have alpha launch, publish alpha launch, and basically you can set up server settings there. Um, I think what you can do in terms of server settings is we really don't have publishing profiles for alpha launch per se, but you can set up different server settings for each workspace that you do. So I'm not sure if it's
I think
multiple
this is a
apps in the same
terrific,
work.
yeah, yeah. I think it's a terrific question, and I don't know the answer offhand. If you would be nice enough to send this into guides,
We will address it.
we will, and we'll show the answer at a follow-up webinar as well as write you back with the answer.
And
So
I definitely wanted to
that's
show
great.
you this because this is a really quick and dirty way for you to publish your stuff and test it without having to go through a whole rigmarole of setting up a phone app and everything else. And it just really is a super nice tool.
Oh
And we'll
yeah,
be covering that a little later in our series.
right, and it lets you distribute your app onto iPhones without having to go directly through the Apple store, which makes it
And
really
access
much easier.
the hardware capabilities, which is really
And still access hardware capabilities, right? We did a whole session on this at DevCon and how to set it up and get it running. Um, so let's see. Next up, where's the question? Someone said, how can I assign a date to a state variable like e underbar state dot state var date from in JavaScript? And then what they want to do is use that to filter SQL in a data control, in a list control. So here's the,
interesting. Wow, you guys are getting fancy there.
I know we're making it hard
Um,
here. So
yeah,
let's,
no. Um, so within the let's kind of go from the end to the beginning part. So with the list
yeah,
capabilities, you have both the built-in search part you can do, but also within here are a bunch, and I'm going to jump over to JavaScript functions and go into methods here. This is like an online, so you can do like a filter of list filter, like a client side filter, which is what I'm guessing they are
yeah,
trying to do, is like everything handled on the client without having to go back to the server from that standpoint. There are two
right.
things you can do it. You can just do a filter list client side, or you can do a set filter here. And I believe the trick is here is within it, you can use, let me go ahead and copy that to there and put it here, and let's see if there's so I don't see any date functionality that you can do from here, but it is possible, meaning that you can set a filter with the date and use that date information. I just haven't done much with dates on it. I don't think you need to use the moment or anything like that. It's really most likely setting up the date, but I'm going to have to check on the set filter function and what its state capabilities. I'm sorry I don't have an answer off the top of my head, but that's kind of a very detailed kind of scenario. So I will
That's
find
fine.
the answer on that. Get that.
Excellent. Can you also talk just a little bit about state variables uh, and what they do and how they are in
Yeah, so built in. So when this is running on your, whenever you publish this, it's actually running within a web browser environment, whether on a phone or a desktop, et cetera, from there. And because of that, you basically get to allow yourself to set and use values. So one of the key things they have in here, and let's see if it's in a state variable. Okay. So let me show you here is that what I did is I went to the on dialog initialize in the server side events. And this is basically when this UX gets launched and run on the device, so whether on a desktop or there, it runs this XBasic. And one of the features you can do is you can set state variables. And what state variables are think of them as temporary variables that live with this component when it's running on the target environment in the web browser. And it uses behind the scenes standard web browsers to write not really cookies, but like memory information that it can be able to do it. And what's nice about state variables is once you've set them, when they're sent back to the server, it includes this data for you. So it's kind of your way to kind of talk between the client and the server. And you can set them in both locations. So you can set the state. So you can say, this is like a new record, or this is an edited record, etc. So it's just your way to kind of pass information back and forth between them. Now, as we were talking about, first, you can set that in the XBasic. So when this runs, it can then say, oh, let's set this myvar to this value. So now that value is set when it's running on the device out in the field or on the web browser. And in your scripts, you can attract that, or you can get that information. So for instance, if you do an XBasic callback and you send it back to it, the system will include that state variable information that is now accessible by the server saying, oh yeah, someone just submitted this to me. I can go look at that state information and see if they changed something, or sort of like passing messages. And you can do that either in XBasic, but also within JavaScript, you can insert a method, and I think you can just say set state info. So let me copy that and close that. Actually, get rid of all this stuff here. So in JavaScript, I can set the state info of your variable to be a value. And this one's setting two variables. So notice it says myvar, but if I go here and I said, oh, I'm going to call it, yeah, myvar1, and then on the here, I can emit this JavaScript. So let's say someone touches a button. I can then, when that happens, I can then write this state info right here, like in this person saying like my date or something like that they're going to use in the filter. Then this state info is available within your JavaScript locally to use. So you can use state variables right on the device itself. Let me make sure I did I lose you?
No, you're
oh,
all
okay.
good.
Sorry,
Yeah,
something
yeah.
bounced, and I was
I
like,
saw that
ruh-roh.
icon bounce up and down too, and
it was so quiet. So there. So again, I can then use that locally here because I can get set state info, but I can also refer to that state information in there. And then what's cool about that is that I can use it locally as kind of like my local memory. Some people use state variables. I've used hidden text fields. There are different methods to do it. Then what you can do is then when, let's say I set this myvar to alpha, if I run like an XBasic callback where I'm clicking a button, it's calling the server to do something, on the server I can say, oh, do me a favor, give me the information about the state variables. Like, tell me what V1, my VR1 is. And then that way I'll know that they did something on there, and then I could then modify my XBasic script. So basically what the individual is talking about is that they basically want to use this as like a local place, so I can put in like a date into a field, save it into a state variable, and then use that to filter immediately on the local a list. But that state variable is also available if I want to say, hey, what is their current filtering? I'll know that on the server, so I can do some stuff there possibly from that. So I know how to set the state variables, but where I have to just check is that if you have a list control with a date column, how do you do that actual filtering? That's where I don't have the knowledge on how to do that. I think it's just going to be a formatting of the information and then doing it within there, but we'll follow up and find out and get the information on that. So yeah, send us an email and we'll do some search on that and find that information and get you the pointer that you need.
Fantastic. Regarding using dates in JavaScript, one of our viewers today was nice enough to send in a piece of JavaScript, which I placed in the chat window if anyone wants to take a look at it. He said the caveat is that it assumes Central Time, so I guess you'll have to adjust that. But beyond that, it's thank you very much for sending that in. Let's see what else we've got here. This is a very quick question. So people, I think people are into your into this task manager app that you're building. They said, when are we going to see the next installment? So the next installment is scheduled for January 18th. It's 2 weeks from today. We do have another webinar, which will be happening next week. We'll be dealing, I believe, with just components in general, and you won't want to miss that one either.
Yeah. Thank you for your urgency. I really look forward to like going through and if you have ideas or stuff, send them in so we can include them in the next sessions. I mean, I have what's in my mind, and we've been talking to Dave about it. But if there are things that you're curious about as far as creating an offline mobile app, using like Alpha Launch, I had that kind of in there, but it sounds it's important. We really need to spend a little more time on that because there's a lot of interest in it. So send those
dive a
emails
little
in.
further into that. Yeah.
Yeah, and we work for you. Yeah. Are you not entertained?
Well, it looks like we've actually chunked through the questions today, which is terrific.
Okay.
If I did, in fact, miss one, which does happen from time to time, again, send it to guides, GUIDES, at alphasoftware.com. Dion, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you,
presenting.
sir.
Thank you, everyone, for showing up. We really appreciate having you here, and we look forward to seeing you next week at our next Alpha demo and Q&A webcast. Until then, take care and stay well. Bye-bye.